All right, good afternoon, everybody. It's Sunday, August the 14th, the year 2016, and this is Rudy, and I wanted to respond to a question that came in from Amy. Amy, I hope you don't mind me using your first name. I think you've asked a very sincere question, and that's what we encourage, is to foster conversation about Schaeffer Cox's case. The more light that's shed on his case, the better. And a man is spending 27 years in prison. And so it's incredibly important that we educate ourselves about what's going on and we make informed decisions about whether we think he's guilty or innocent. He's been charged with weapons charges. I would say the two different types of charges that were brought against him are weapons charges. I made a video about that. It's over 10 minutes long. It's called Schaeffer Cox on the weapons charges, where Schaeffer Cox covers all of the weapons charges. So if you want to go into detail, just go find that video. If you can't find it, let me know and I'll point it out to you. This particular video is going to be on the conspiracy to commit murder, and that's what Amy's asking about. Okay, Amy writes, Rudy, I just listened to your post from August the 8th. Schaeffer's definitive plan was to use peaceful protest, not murder. To me, it sounded like he said to keep getting ready for 2-for-1, until then to do peaceful protest. Did I hear that right? Am I missing something? Can you help me out in Christ, Amy? I am going to try to help you out, Amy, and I'm going to do the best that I can to give you my perspective on this. And I'm interested in what others have to say as well, whether you're pro-Schaeffer or against Schaeffer. The first thing I would recommend you do, Amy, because I know there's that audio of Schaeffer was 2 minutes and 33 seconds long. There's a portion of that audio where he talks about 2-for-1, and I believe I know exactly what portion you're referring to. Let me say this. The first thing you got to understand is that the government went after Schaeffer for over 2 years. They have over 200 hours of recorded conversation. There's a $300,000 whore named Gerald J.R. Olson that was one of those government informants that was recording Schaeffer. Gerald J.R. Olson, recorder, he had the ability to turn it on and off. And you say, why do you call him a $300,000 whore? Gerald J.R. Olson was facing a life sentence himself for his own crimes. He was running drugs for Hell's Angels. He had an entire life history of swindling people out of their money. And he was facing a life sentence himself until he got the opportunity to work for the government and to try to bring down Schaeffer. So Gerald J.R. Olson, the $300,000 whore, had a very large incentive to find something wrong with Schaeffer. And so when he infiltrated Schaeffer's militia, when he infiltrated Schaeffer's friendship, he had to find something wrong. And his life history was gaining the confidence of little old ladies, making sure they believed in him, taking all their money, and then swindling them and leaving them with nothing whatsoever. And that's exactly what he did to Schaeffer. He built up confidence with Schaeffer, and then he sold him out. But he had an incentive to sell Schaeffer down the river. Not only that, but the government gave him a tape recorder that he could turn on and off. So Schaeffer said that he would go up to the group, start a conversation about 2-for-1, start a conversation about violence. Then he would turn on the conversation, and if you just listen to the recording, you would think that Schaeffer is the one who started the conversation, but it was actually $300,000 whore Gerald J.R. Olson. There was a big contention in the trial that the prosecutors did not hand over the original tapes that could be proven that they were not manipulated or spliced. So that's a very important aspect to consider as you consider these audio recordings that we're uploading from this $300,000 whore Gerald J.R. Olson. But I do believe I know the exact part of the tape that you're referring to, Amy, where Schaeffer talks about 2-for-1. Okay, there's a documentary that I would ask that you go watch. And as you're watching this documentary, it's about a guy by the name of Gilberto Valle. Let me find his name exactly. Well, I thought I could find his name, but well, I'm pretty sure it's Gilberto Valle. But it's a 1 hour and 21 minutes. I'll put the link in the description bar. and it's called HBO Thought Crimes: The Case of Cannibal Cop 2015. Okay, and it really bothers me that I cannot find his name. Let me just Google it. Sorry, I'm having to waste this time. Cannibal Cop. Yeah. Okay, I had it right. Cannibal Cop Gilberto Valley. Okay, it's a 1 hour and 21 minute documentary, and I want you to watch that, Amy. It's going to be hard for you to watch because some of it's, I don't know how old you are. I hope you're an adult. I hope you have a good sense and you don't get scared very easily. But this cop, he said some horrific things with the words that come out of his mouth. He said that he wanted to torture his wife to make her feel the most amount of pain that she could possibly feel. He wanted to kill her. He wanted to stuff a rag of chloroform in her mouth. He wanted to eat her flesh while she was alive. I mean, the things that he said were horrific. And he even talked about engaging with another individual where there would be a financial transaction. This guy was a cop, and he even used his tools and his computers at work to look up victims' addresses. And he would go to where the victims were, and he would scope out where they lived as kind of a surveillance run. Okay, now this guy Gilberto Valley said his words. They said some very horrific things. It's like death threats. People don't get put in prison for death threats. They have to have death threats with intention. It's called mens rea, a guilty mind. You ever heard of the phrase mens rea? MENSREA, right? It means that you have intention to follow through with the threat, and people might come ask you questions. They might, follow up and check you out. But if you don't have any intentions behind the death threat and you were just blowing off steam, it's very unlikely you'll ever go to prison. As a matter of fact, Gilberto Valley is not in prison. A judge overturned everything, even though there's evidence that he said some very horrific things. Now, why is this important? Why am I bringing up the cannibal cop in Gilberto Valley? The point I'm trying to make with you, Amy, is that regardless of how you interpret Schaeffer Cox's statement about 241, there's two things that you have to have from a legal perspective in order, well, there's probably more than two, but I want you to consider at least these two, and then I'll read to you the exact jury instructions. But you have to have mens rea, which is a guilty mind, which means that the intention of Schaeffer Cox really was to murder somebody. And I would argue that Schaeffer Cox's mindset back in 2011, as we were having a financial collapse, people have referred to WRAL, which means without rule of law. And Schaeffer thought we were going to have a collapse of the United States government. And when you talk about 241, it's a conditional thing. It means if they murder a member of my family, this is a potential of how we could retaliate. But it doesn't mean that he will do that. You have to have mens rea, which is an intent to actually go do it. And I would argue that all of the evidence in Schaeffer Cox's case, after the government hounded him and provoked him by going after his children, the government informant Benedict Arnold Bill Fulton threatened his life. He threatened his friend's life with a knife. There was military police, Ron Gibson, that told Schaeffer the government wanted to kill him to put an end to the Schaeffer Cox problem, and that's why they were going after his children. So one of the options that was talked about was 241, but Schaeffer never had an intention to kill anybody, and that is the proof of that is that all of the evidence. What did Schaeffer do when it finally came time for him to do something? What did he do? He tried to leave Alaska with his family. He was trying to get out of the state. He wasn't trying to kill anybody. So he did not have mens rea. That's why this cannibal cop, after all the horrific things that this cannibal cop said, that's why he's walking around free today. A judge overturned it because they said that he didn't have intent. He just ran his mouth off and it was all fantasy. So not only did Schaeffer Cox not have mens rea, but he did not have there was no imminence to the crime. Schaeffer Cox, if you read a U.S. Observer article, it's called the setup. It's called the Federal Setup, the Conspiracy to Entrap Schaeffer Cox. The second paragraph talks about a Supreme Court, Hess versus Indiana. And it said that we're allowed to have inflammatory speech. That's part of our free speech, is it can be very inflammatory. Our founding fathers had inflammatory speech. Thomas Jefferson said that the tree of liberty must be fertilized from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. It is its natural manure. That is inflammatory speech. Patrick Henry said, "Give me liberty or give me death." Our own Declaration of Independence said, "After a long train of abuses, it is not only our right, it is our duty to implement new government." How do you expect to implement new government without bloodshed? Okay, it is our duty to resist tyranny. I would argue that 241 is a defensive measure. Let me ask you this. If you have 10 liquor stores, and the first liquor store, the robbers go in, and the robber shoots the guy behind the cash register, and they take all the money, and the people in the liquor store never tried to retaliate. Well, they got 10 liquor stores. They're going to go do that to number 2. They're going to do that to number 3. You know what, Amy? Eventually, the robbers are going to hit a liquor store, and the guy's going to shoot back. You know what I mean? And he's going to try to kill the 2 robbers, right? And is the guy in the liquor store doing something wrong when he tries to shoot back? No. Matter of fact, you could argue that the fact he shot back means that these 2 robbers, being the predators that they are, they're not going to go visit the next 5 liquor stores. They're going to think twice because they said, "Hey, last time we tried to go do that, the guy shot back." So the fact that Schaeffer Cox talked about that, but you got to understand he also talked about bluffing. And the 241 plan was initially brought up by Norm Olson, which is another militia leader up north. And he said that it was used as a propaganda tool to dissuade a predator government from attacking members of the militia. Okay? So if I don't even believe that Schaeffer's speech is all that inflammatory. When I listened to Schaeffer's 2 minutes and 33-second speech, he was listing every single peaceful protest you can imagine. His comments about the 241 plan, I didn't even consider it that inflammatory. But Amy, if you're just coming into this new and you don't have the background about Bill Fulton, Benedict Arnold Bill Fulton, threatening Schaeffer's life, if you don't have the background about the military police informing Schaeffer that there were law enforcement officials that were out to get him and put an end to the Schaeffer Cox problem, if you don't understand they were after his children through the Office of Children's Services, then you may listen to what Schaeffer had to say and say, that was completely inappropriate. But if you understand the full context of everything, you'll understand it was very appropriate and it wasn't even any big deal. Not only that, I would argue that there was no mens rea, there's no intent, and there was no imminence. It wasn't like Schaeffer actually had a plan to go kill anybody at a particular time. He just said at some point in the future, this is something we can consider. Okay, so I've talked about imminence. I've talked about mens rea. I've talked about thought crime and that it's not illegal to, the government can't put us in prison for our speech or for our thoughts. A really, really good example is this Gilberto Valle, the cannibal cop. He wanted to eat his wife alive and to torture her while she was pregnant. And he talked about it on the internet and how he would do all of this horrific things to her. And not only her, but other women as well. And he uploaded real pictures of real women that he talked about doing these things with. And he even had financial arrangements with other people on the internet. But yet the court decided that none of it, he didn't have any intent, and that they let him go. So consider that when you read the speeches, what I would consider very docile speech in comparison with Schaeffer Cox, who's spending 27 years in prison, and we got this guy that was talking about eating people alive and torturing them, right? Schaeffer Cox never intended to kill anybody. The evidence proves that. Also, there was no imminence. He did not have mens rea, and there's no evidence. Okay, what else do I want to talk about? I want to read to you the jury instructions. Okay? This is the actual jury instructions that was sent to the Schaeffer Cox jury. It's page 56, and it's jury instruction number 48. In order for you to properly consider the charge of conspiracy to murder officers and employees of the United States, you must understand the elements of the crime of murder of officers and employees of the United States. So what it's saying is, if you're gonna consider that Schaeffer's guilty of conspiring to murder, you must understand the definition of murder, right? And matter of fact, before I read the rest of this jury instruction, let me read to you the legal definition of murder. Okay? I'm going to Google it, and you can too. You can too, Amy. Legal definition of murder. Common law murder. At common law, murder was defined as killing another human being with malice aforethought. Malice aforethought is a legal term of art that encompasses the following types of murder: intent to kill or murder. Okay? I would argue that Schaeffer never intended to murder anybody. Let's look up the legal definition of self-defense. Because if you kill somebody in self-defense, it's not murder. The use of reasonable force to protect oneself or members of the family from bodily harm from the attack of an aggressor. If the defender has reason to believe he, she, they is or are in danger, self-defense is a common defense by a person accused of assault, battery, or homicide. In Schaeffer's case, nobody was killed. There's no victim. There's not even any reasonable proof that he ever was going to kill anybody. And yet, they put him in prison. There's no victim, there's no crime. And if you look up what the legal definition of self-defense is, it says to protect oneself or members of the family from bodily harm from attack of an aggressor. Schaeffer had multiple reasons to believe that the government was attacking him. He had this military policeman that worked on a military base at Fort Wainwright contact him and say, hey, there's law officials that have come to me and they said they want to put an end to the Schaeffer Cox problem. You had a Benedict Arnold, Bill Fulton, that threatened Schaeffer Cox's life and pulled a knife and put it to Les Zerbe's throat and threatened to slit his effing throat. Okay? You also had them going after his children. Okay? So Schaeffer was looking at the totality of the situation, and he was like, what are the options on the table? And you know what his options, what he eventually decided upon? Is he decided upon to pull a Gandhi and not a Rambo. He decided upon, let's leave Alaska. He didn't decide upon to kill anybody. There's nobody in imminent danger. Nobody was ever in imminent danger because Schaeffer wasn't planning on killing anybody. Okay, let's move. There's a recent case by a Canadian judge. I want you to go look it up. It's in the Washington Post, and Google the phrase Canadian judge rules entrapped in terror case. They had over 200 officers of the Canadian Royal Mounties set up these two teenagers and try to make terrorists out of them. And the judge said, we have enough terrorists without our police department trying to make more. Here's what the deal is. The police departments and the ATF and the FBI and the Department of Justice, they need justification for their existence. And so they have to make a boogeyman. And so they get paid lots of money, and they get bonuses by Loretta Lynch and Eric Holder and Karen Loeffler, the Attorney General of Alaska. they get paid bonuses when they bring in a boogeyman. And so the government informants that they hire are con artists and people with criminal histories. And they go out in the community, and guess what? They provide boogeymen. They make boogeymen out of innocent people like Schaeffer Cox. Let me go back and read the rest of that jury instruction. Okay, we've read the legal definition of self-defense. We've read the legal definition of murder, and here it goes on to say, the government is not required to prove these elements in this case, but the government is required to prove that the defendants entered into an agreement to commit that crime. Talking about conspiring to murder. The crime of murder of officers and employees of the United States has 4 elements. First, the defendant unlawfully killed one or more officers and employees of the United States. That never happened. There was never anybody in any danger with Schaeffer Cox or his militia. If you understand Schaeffer Cox, if you listen to his 1 hour and 41 minute Montana speech, you can understand his heart. He spoke with inflammatory language just like the founders of this country did. He spoke with bold language that would frighten the timid. But if you understand that we are in a war with tyranny, he was using absolutely appropriate language. Second, the defendant did so with malice aforethought. Okay, Schaeffer wasn't trying to initiate any violence with anybody. Schaeffer thought that people were trying to come kill him, and he had very good reason to believe that. He was not paranoid. He had Bill Fulton making death threats. He had Bill Fulton pulling a knife to his friend's throat, threatening to slit his effing throat. I mean, I've already told you about how the military policemen in Fort Wainwright, they were going after. All right, hey everyone, my iPhone ran out of storage at 22 minutes, so I'm gonna just gonna wrap up here. Okay, just summary. The jury instructions that went to Schaeffer's jury said that to kill with malice aforethought, which is one of the requirements, means to either kill deliberately or intentionally or recklessly with extreme disregard for human life. Schaeffer Cox was trying to not only save his family's life, he was doing everything he can to avoid confrontation. Ultimately, what ended up happening is he tried to leave Alaska, right? He even went and talked to a state trooper. He told other members of law enforcement that there's some crazy people like Bill Fulton that were threatening people's lives. It also goes on to say that premeditation means with planning and deliberation. So I just want to wrap this up. You and I may have a disagreement about whether Schaeffer used inflammatory speech. Okay, but inflammatory speech is protected under the First Amendment. If you don't believe that, just go look at the cannibal cop, Gilberto Valle. He used some horrific inflammatory speech. If you read Psalms 109 in the Bible, you could say that Psalms 109 is inflammatory speech. But yet we can read our Bible, thank God. Listen, I think all the evidence in its totality, it tells me that Schaeffer Cox was in fear for his life from various sources. One was Benedict Arnold Bill Fulton. A law enforcement officer at Fort Wainwright told Schaeffer that there was law enforcement officials that wanted to put an end to the Schaeffer Cox problem. He interpreted that as they wanted to kill him, plus they were going after his children. So I don't even think that what Schaeffer said is all that inflammatory. It lines up with our founders. Thomas Jefferson was inflammatory. Patrick Henry was inflammatory. Our own Declaration of Independence is inflammatory. But I would hope you would agree with me that Schaeffer Cox wasn't he wasn't intending or planning to kill anybody. His actions don't reflect that of a murderer. He did not have mens rea, a guilty mind. There was no imminence to the crime. It was always at some vague point in the future. There was no imminence. He wasn't planning on meeting somebody at Friday night to hide in the bushes and to go murder anybody. It was always, if they kill me or a member of my family, if social order breaks down, if we get into without rule of law, if we have a financial collapse of the United States, and if that stuff never happened, well, then there would be no need to do anything. So we don't put people in prison for thought crimes. You may not agree with the thoughts that were running through Schaeffer's head, but we don't put people in prison for thought crimes. Gilberto Valle had some of the most horrific, satanic, evil thoughts that you can possibly imagine. He's walking around free. I don't even know. Listen, Gilberto Valle, just go. The reason that case is important is because it puts forth the idea about thought crimes. We do not put people in prison for thought crimes. We have freedom of thought in this country, or at least we're supposed to. Also, self-defense. Schaeffer was in fear for his life and his family's life. He was talking with his friends about how are we going to stop this? How are we going to stop them from hurting me and my family? Ultimately, what he wound up doing is leaving Alaska. Also, we need to keep in mind that $300,000 whore, Gerald J.R. Olson, could start and stop his recorder anytime he wanted to. And so they went after Schaeffer for over 2 years. They have over 200 hours of recording. And so in 200 hours of recording, that's the worst that they got. They never got a meeting where they're planning on killing anybody. They weren't planning on killing anybody. All of his conversations was, let's not perform a Rambo, let's do a Gandhi. I got to leave the state. I'm going to get out of here. To me, it's very clear that Schaeffer Cox is not guilty of conspiracy to commit murder of government officials, and that he was railroaded by Steve Scrocky, Loretta Lynch, Yvonne Lamoureux, Joseph Bottini, and the whole Polar Pen team that has a history. Karen Loeffler, Eric Holder, they have a history of going after people against the Obama administration. So for the rest of my life, I'm going to speak up until Schaeffer Cox gets out of prison. And I'm going to do my best to expose these evil bastards. I hope that you'll join me. Thank you for your time and listening. I'm sorry that my camera ran out of space, but I'll try to correct that. And that's my wrap up. And I do think that we should continue to discuss this case. The more we discuss it, the more we learn about it, the better it is for Schaeffer. Schaeffer has said that when the truth gets out, so will he. And I totally agree with that statement.